Right, so since Triple H took over WWE Creative, he has definitely got a lot of W's, especially in the first couple of years in his reign as head of creative, but in the last couple of years, he has especially taken a lot of L's. For me, in my opinion, there have been many wrestlers who have departed from WWE or are even still employed by WWE right now who are just not reaching their full potential under Triple H's booking. So today we're going to be discussing and going through who I believe to be the biggest fumbles and biggest creative failures so far in WWE under Triple H. So join me today as we go over Triple H's biggest fumbles and creative blunders in wrestlers booking. Like and subscribe, and let's just begin. Prior to signing with WWE in 2019, Kaylee Ray had a whole load of history and experience in the wrestling business, including with WWE already. Born in Scotland, Kaylee Ray began her career in 2009, becoming a staple of the Scottish independent scene, specifically with ICW and the wider British wrestling scene. She got an extra popularity boost when she was a finalist on TNA British Boot Camp, a competition show to earn a TNA contract, where she finished runner-up. Which just went to show how talented she was and the potential that was saw in her, and in the next couple of years she would become a staple of the British wrestling scene. One of the top stars in the entire scene, working the likes of ICW, Progress, What Culture, and even Stardom in Japan and Shimmer in America, helping broaden her reach. She even made a WWE Jobber appearance in 2015, being squashed by Nia Jax, and then in 2017 she would be part of the Mae Young Classic tournament, the all-women's tournament, but she was eliminated in the first round. And as I said, it wouldn't be until 2019, when NXT UK had already formed, that KLR would reappear in WWE, as she made her debut at the beginning of the year, instantly establishing herself as one of the top heel women on the brand and earning herself a women's title shot, which took place at TakeOver Cardiff against Toni Storm, and she would win, becoming the NXT UK Women's Champion just like that quickly. And Kaylee Ray was a very dominant NXT UK Women's Champion. Matter of fact, around this time, she was maybe the best Women's Champion in all of WWE. She defended the belt numerous times in barn burners, including at TakeOver Blackpool 2020, a show I was there for, against Toni Storm and Piper Niven in a triple threat match. That match was crazy, as well as retaining in singles action against them both, and she also competed in the Women's War Games match in mainline NXT while she was the NXT UK Women's Champion, and at first she even defeated Miko Satomura to retain the belt as well. But alas, she would end up losing the belt to Miko at the start of 2021, ending her reign at 649 days. Crazy. And from there she would move over to mainline NXT, where she would turn babyface, getting involved in War Games once again as the NXT women fought against the Toxic Attraction. And whilst KLR was being presented as one of the top women on the brand, she came in at the worst time, as this was when Mandy Rose was dominating with the title, and Kaylee Ray would fail to dethrone Mandy Rose for the belt multiple times, as it was also here where she was repackaged as Alba Fire, a name that legit I never used. She was always Kaylee Ray to me. But she did lose to Mandy Rose the second time after interference from Isla Dawn, and the two would trade wins back and forth in a feud, but this would actually end up with them as a tag team. And on the 1st of April 2022, the team of Isla Dawn and Alba Fire would win their NXT Women's Tag titles, and hey, let me tell you, this was an awesome team. And not too long after winning the belts, they were called up to the main roster, and so there would be a unification match for both sets of women's tag belts, as they would face main roster tag champs Ronda Rousey and Shayna Baszler. And they would lose this unification match in a totally wrong decision, as Fire and Dawn after this would be off TV, but they did return a couple of months later, now with the new tag team name of the Unholy Union. And after being drafted to Raw in the 2024 draft, they would win the women's tag titles, defeating Bianca Belair and Jade Cargill. It was an awesome moment to see, and it felt like we had the top women's tag team in our hands right now. And they would defend the belts against the Pure Fusion Collective and the Meta-4, two niche stables there, before losing them back to Bianca and Jade after just under 3 months. And well, that was pretty much the end of the team. As after this they became total jobbers, would hardly get used on TV, and Isla Dawn was released at the start of 2025, thus ending the team permanently. And from here, Alba Fire's new gimmick was to be a sidekick for Chelsea Green, as she officially joined the Secret Service along with Piper Niven and would wrestle all her matches in a suit. This was a role that was just never gonna take off or go far or even last, and it just sucked to see someone of Kaylee Ray's talent and caliber be reduced to just a side character role. She was a total jobber, was never winning matches, and only existed to lose to whoever Chelsea was currently feuding with. And ultimately, her WWE contract would run up, with WWE choosing not to renew it in April 2026, along with other Black Friday releases and cuts, thus ending her 7-year tenure with the company. And what a waste of time her entire main roster run felt like. It was just dumb, because they had something there with the Unholy Union, which they interrupted the growth of in NXT to hotshot and call up to the main roster, even giving them the women's tag belts after a while, making it seem like they were going to invest in them, but no, they just totally abandoned it. Kaylee Ray has since gone back to using that name and is working the indies once again, and I for one would love to see a Kaylee Ray singles resurgence run in AEW, similar to Tommaso Ciampa, but time will tell if I'll get to see that. Stephen Farrelly was born in Dublin, Ireland on the 28th of January 1978, and prior to becoming a wrestler he kept himself very busy by playing Gaelic football, playing rugby union, and working as a bodyguard / bouncer. He did this job working for nightclubs and also working with clients like Bono of the Irish band U2. And 2002 is the year that he would become a professional wrestler, though having been inspired by WWF and World of Sport, as he would debut on the Irish indie scene that year under the name of Seamus O'Shaughnessy. And early on in his career though, Seamus suffered a neck injury from a botched hip toss that nearly made him call it quits early. He would take 2 years off of wrestling before coming back in 2004, and by 2005 he had expanded to working in the British wrestling scene, where he worked with many notable names, working with the likes of Raven, Vampiro, Nigel McGuinness, Nick Aldis, Doug Williams, Stu Sanders aka Wade Barrett, and none other than Drew Galloway aka Drew McIntyre. And from 2006 to 2007, he would have various cameo appearances and tryout matches with WWE, as he faced Drew Galloway, Stu Sanders, and Jimmy Wang Yang in those tryout matches. And finally, at the end of 2007, he would get the offer from WWE, as he was given a developmental deal with them and would relocate to America to begin working for Florida Championship Wrestling. As throughout his time in FCW, his ring name would flip between Seamus O'Shaughnessy and simply just Sheamus, which eventually would stick around for the rest of his wrestling career. And he of course worked with many well-known names during his time in FCW, such as Nick Nemeth, Kofi Kingston, Matt Sydal, Ted DiBiase Jr., Heath Slater, Alex Riley, Tyrus, Ryback, and of course the GOAT Bam Neely. He would win the FCW Florida Heavyweight title, winning it off of Jack Swagger, and would also wrestle past rival Drew McIntyre numerous times before in mid-2009 when he began working dark matches for Raw, obviously signaling that a main roster call-up was looming, and that indeed would come just a month later when he was called up to the WWE ECW brand, as he would begin his ECW run by squashing jobbers before engaging in a multi-month feud with Goldust, which was actually a very solid feud. And his dominance continued on as he kept beating anyone in his path on the ECW brand, and he would end up getting hot-shotted to Monday Night Raw. as he was established on Raw in a big way when he destroyed Jamie Noble in a match and kayfabe ended his career, thus marking a brand new big heel in WWE. And that same month he would qualify for a breakthrough battle royal where the winner got a shot at the WWE title, and very shockingly Sheamus would win, with a tables match against John Cena, the WWE champion, now scheduled for TLC in one of the most interesting and bold WWE ideas for this time. With this whole feud being entirely built on the fact that Cena didn't need to be pinned to drop the belt, Sheamus just needed to put him through a table to win it, and in one of the most ballsy moves that WWE has ever made, Sheamus would win. After just about 2 months on Raw, he was already the WWE champion, going over John Cena at a time where not really anybody was. And many people did attribute the title win to his friendship behind the scenes with Triple H, but regardless of the circumstances and whether fans were ready to accept him as one yet, a main event superstar had just been made. As for the title reign itself though, it was a nothing burger, with both the title defenses coming with DQ finishes, and he lost the belt at 2010 Elimination Chamber back to John Cena after just a couple of months. His next order of business was a feud with Triple H, with them facing off at Mania 26 in Sheamus' WrestleMania debut, where Triple H would beat him for Sheamus' first clean singles loss, because of course it was Triple H doing it. They would rematch at Extreme Rules though, and this time he would win in dominant fashion, putting Triple H on the shelf and kind of ending his full-time wrestling career. And right after that, at Fatal 4-Way, he would win the WWE title back thanks to the Nexus in a, you guessed it, a Fatal 4-Way match. That was the gimmick of the pay-per-view. The entire gimmick was Fatal 4-Way matches. This reign really wasn't much better though, as his title defenses either ended in a no contest, DQ, or he had help from the Nexus, and he ended up losing the belt at Night of Champions. He'd end off the year with a mundane feud against Randy Orton, and then he'd win the King of the Ring, going by King Sheamus for a bit of time. And then going into 2011, he would have a quick reign with the United States belt before being drafted to SmackDown, and that summer would turn face in a very interesting decision, but one that would ultimately help his wrestling career, as in 2012 he would win the Royal Rumble match to guarantee himself a world title Mania match, which was great for him, but the booking around it was not, as at WrestleMania 28 he would challenge Daniel Bryan for his world title in the opener, winning in just 18 seconds. And I think nowadays everyone agrees that Chris Jericho really should have won the 2012 Royal Rumble. It just made way more sense. And this world title reign was definitely better than the others, but still pretty meh. He at least had some clean defenses this time, but the problem is that he spent most of the reign feuding with Alberto Del Rio in an awful feud. His feud and storyline with the Big Show over the belt though, that was awesome, and that's who he would end up dropping the title to. And 2013 would be a quieter year for Sheamus, as he was one of the baby faces feuding with The Shield, and elsewhere he feuded with Mark Henry and Damien Sandow, with himself suffering a torn labrum in the summer of that year, and he would make his return in the 2014 Royal Rumble. He won the US title once again a couple of months later, which resulted in his best WWE title reign to date, but after losing the belt to Rusev, he was written off TV again to go and get surgery. And when he did return on the Raw after WrestleMania in 2015, it would kick off maybe the worst era of his career, as he returned with a whole new mohawk look, receiving "you look stupid" chants, which really hurt his aura, and he was a heel once again. But very quickly he just began losing match after match after match, before out of nowhere winning the Money in the Bank briefcase that year. But as the Money in the Bank holder, he once again just continued to lose match after match, but somehow would successfully cash in at Survivor Series to win the WWE title again. And somehow, some way, this was the worst world title reign of them all, as he feuded with Roman Reigns over the belt in multiple matches, winning by nefarious means every time with the help of the League of Nations stable. A makeshift stable consisting of himself, Wade Barrett, Rusev, and Alberto Del Rio, oh my god, did this shit suck. And after losing the belt to Roman at the end of the year, this became the main focus for him, and 2016 was looking like it was gonna be Sheamus' worst year yet. But luckily for himself, the League of Nations would disband and he was drafted to Raw in the reformed brand split and would be paired with Cesaro in a move that really saved his year. As what started out with a makeshift tag team with two rivals turned tag team partners became one of the all-time great WWE tag teams, as they were known as The Bar. And The Bar were absolutely awesome. They had great chemistry, a great look, put on great matches, and by the start of 2018, they were 4-time tag team champions, so they were very successful. And that success would continue when they were drafted to SmackDown that year, but after dropping the SmackDown tag titles to Shane McMahon and The Miz at the 2019 Royal Rumble, yes, that is a real sentence, things would very much slow down for The Bar, with the team fading away when the two were separated in the draft, but this really was the rejuvenation of Sheamus' career. The Bar were truly awesome. Now in 2020, Sheamus was a singles worker once again, and this is where his career renaissance would really go to the next level, as this was a fun year for Sheamus. He had that awesome bar fight match with Jeff Hardy, and he also formed an alliance with Drew McIntyre known as the Banger Bros. But when Drew won the WWE title, Sheamus got jealous and a feud kicked off between the two, with Sheamus failing to win the belt, but he would win the US title off of Riddle at WrestleMania in a great match. This would be his best US title reign yet, as he defended the belt against Humberto and Ricochet before dropping it to Damian Priest at SummerSlam. And by the end of the year, he had formed himself another alliance, as joined by Ridge Holland and eventually Pete Dunne, or Butch, the Brawling Brutes were formed. A fun group with a fun gimmick, with the Brutes being involved in top stories throughout 2022, such as the Bloodline storyline. He also faced Gunther for the IC title at Clash in the Castle in what was an incredible match, maybe the best of his entire career, with himself and Gunther being constant rivals over the IC title, as Drew McIntyre also got involved and they had a 3-way match for the belt at Mania 39, with Gunther retaining once again. But this was also once again a banger of a match, and this was probably the best stretch of Sheamus' career, as he was doing the best work he had ever done. He did get injured in this match, however, and the Brutes were disbanded whilst he was injured, with injuries unfortunately plaguing the last few years of his WWE career. And after returning in 2024, he feuded with former ally Butch, and in the next year challenged Bron Breakker for the IC title, with that belt ending up being the only title he didn't win during his WWE run, as he would end off 2025 doing some stuff with John Cena for his retirement tour, as he entered the Time Is Now tournament for the right to face Cena in his final match, winning his first round matchup against Shinsuke Nakamura, and then the next week he had a wholesome Chunga 6-man tag match where he teamed up with Cena and Rey Mysterio to defeat the Judgment Day in a very nostalgic match. But very unluckily for Sheamus though, he hurt his shoulder in this match, having to get surgery on it, meaning he was now out of the tournament, and this 6-man tag ended up being his final ever WWE match. As after 7 months on the shelf with silence and speculation on when Sheamus would make his comeback, it was reported earlier this week that Sheamus had opted to not renew his WWE contract, as apparently Sheamus was offered a restructured deal, presumably with a pay cut, with others being offered the same kind of deal, and he would turn it down. As a few days ago it was made official, with his profile being moved to the alumni section on WWE.com, with this whole thing just being a very anticlimactic ending for a near 20-year run in WWE. Sheamus truly deserved better than that. He deserved an actual goodbye or send-off. And it's just more proof that nobody's job is safe in this current WWE regime if they were willing to do that to Sheamus, who had been around for so damn long. As Sheamus' WWE career in the end was kind of a weird one, especially at first because they got his presentation totally correct, but poor booking decisions really made his career suffer. It wasn't finally until the 2020s when they finally figured out how to use this guy perfectly, and he was putting on the best work of his career. Banger after banger after banger after banger after banger. But now with Sheamus gone from the WWE, it just begs the question, what is next for Sheamus? I mean, surely he has to end up in AEW, right? Despite his age and the fact that he's an ex-WWE guy and maybe a little more loyal to them than he would be to AEW, I think AEW should pick him up because I think he would still very much suit the AEW environment and product. And if anything these last few years have shown, it's that Sheamus can still very much put on a banger and can still very much go, and I would love to see him in a Continental Classic, not gonna lie. So under the ring name of Tommy End, he would officially make his debut in 2002, so he's been around in wrestling for a long while, like I said, over 2 decades now, and he wrestled extensively on the European circuit, especially going into the late 2010s when he'd start wrestling more on the Brit Res scene like in Progress, and in Rev Pro and OTT, and WXW in Germany. And he was a standout name in the European wrestling scene during the 2000s and mid-2010s to the point that he was imported to do work elsewhere in Japan and in America, with PWG being a place that really became home for Tommy End, and he became a name that is quite synonymous with the PWG brand. And of course, that long work on the independent scene would finally lead to 2016 when he was picked up by the WWE and would report to the Performance Center, now taking on the new ring name of Aleister Black. Though his first appearance after the name change was made was under the name of Tommy End, he would, of course, be Aleister Black throughout his entire WWE run, and vignettes would begin to air in March of 2017 for the in-ring debut of Aleister Black on NXT TV, and he would indeed make his debut under this dark, mysterious, goth-like gimmick, and picking up major momentum on the yellow brand, as he would get wins over the likes of Andrade, Hideo Itami, and even had a classic with Velveteen Dream, which really put him on the map for WWE fans at TakeOver War Games that year. And in 2018, he would win the NXT Championship for the first and only time in his career, cementing himself as the top guy for NXT at this time. Fans were super behind Aleister Black at this time. He had a cool aesthetic, a cool moveset, was doing good matches, was good and compelling on the mic. This NXT run was a home run for Aleister Black. He would hold the title for about 3.5 months before dropping it to Tommaso Ciampa, and whilst he was not the champion, he would still remain on NXT TV and be a focal point in various storylines like the Johnny Gargano Mystery Attacker story. Himself and Ricochet formed a makeshift tag team, and they won the 2019 Dusty Rhodes Tag Team Classic, which earned them an NXT tag title shot, but they did not win that. And that would be Aleister Black's final NXT appearance. As just before this, he had actually officially made his main roster debut on Monday Night Raw, continuing that team with Ricochet in just a hot-shotted NXT call-up. They competed for the Raw Tag Team Championships at Fastlane, but they did not win that match. And then at WrestleMania, they then challenged for the SmackDown Tag Championships, but once again, they did not win. So Aleister Black just flip-flopping between Raw and SmackDown right from the beginning, and that trend would continue because as part of the Superstar Shakeup, he was drafted to the Raw brand, but then just a week later, he was drafted back to SmackDown. This was because his real-life wife, Zelina Vega, was wrestling on the SmackDown brand, but it also meant that his now alliance with Ricochet was over. And yeah, man, this SmackDown run sure was a whole lot of nothing, as throughout this entire SmackDown run, all Aleister Black did was sit in a dark room and say that he is waiting for someone to knock on the door and waiting for a challenge. And that's all he did every single week until, you know, like a week before the pay-per-view, some guy would knock, and that would be the match that was made, and then they'd wrestle before he'd repeat the cycle once again. Then later on in that year, he was drafted back to the Raw brand, where he did seem to do a little bit more on Raw. You know, he wasn't just sitting in a dark room for the entirety of his run, and was much more of a focal point on TV, though it still did not live up to his NXT run whatsoever, as maybe the biggest things he did during this Raw run during the pandemic era of the WWE was his feud with Seth Rollins and getting tossed off the top of WWE headquarters by Baron Corbin. And during this year, he would also turn heel for the first time in his WWE run, which also didn't really lead to all that much. And in the 2020 draft, he was once again drafted back to the SmackDown brand. What's really the point in the brand split if you're just going to flip-flop them each year anyway? Give them some time to gel with the new roster members, surely. But following the draft, Aleister Black would just disappear from TV for 6 months unexplained, and when he did return, he was in a feud with Big E, which did actually seem some more interesting. However, the two never got to even have a match because Aleister Black was released right in the middle of it. Yep, on June 2nd, 2021, Aleister Black was officially released from the WWE as part of the many COVID budget cuts, and this was seen as a major fumble by WWE. People really liked Aleister Black. He had an awesome NXT run not even that long ago, and just did nothing on the main roster, not even given a chance. So yeah, this was seen as a total failure from the WWE, and at this stage, in 2021, there was obviously only one other place that Aleister Black was gonna end up in. And that, of course, was All Elite Wrestling, as the now former Aleister Black made his AEW debut on the July 7th, 2021 episode of AEW Dynamite, attacking Cody Rhodes in what was a shocking moment. It was made more shocking by the fact that his release clause was not a 60-day one. He didn't have that active, so he was able to debut immediately on AEW, and that made it for a total surprise. And he would take on the new persona of Malachi Black, and in his first AEW match, he would defeat Cody Rhodes in a huge win. If you don't understand the Codyverse and the control that Cody Rhodes had, that was a big win to be getting. But I mean, obviously in Codyverse fashion, this was totally undone with Cody Rhodes returning back the win multiple times in the numerous rematches they had. I don't think Malachi won a single match against Cody Rhodes following this. And following his stuff with Cody Rhodes, it was kind of now at limbo once again. It didn't seem like AEW had much ideas for him as a singles competitor, but in early 2022, the House of Black would officially form when he started teaming up with Brody King on AEW, who was his tag team partner in PWG. It's something that had been speculated about happening in AEW for a long while, and now it finally was, and Buddy Matthews, the former Buddy Murphy, would also join the group to officially make them a trio, and then of course they were eventually joined by Julia Hart as well, who made that big character change. And now the House of Black was complete, and I think they were a solid stable. They had the aesthetic nailed, they had good tag team offense, it elevated the guys in there, maybe outside of Malachi, and I mean, we can sure explain why, because despite really having it all there with this stable being the perfect storm, they just weren't booked very well at all. It seemed like AEW was very hesitant to make them look weak, so as a result they just hardly appeared on TV, as AEW I guess also didn't want them going over the people they wanted to. They did have a trios title reign, but this reign totally felt like a here damn reign, because it came right after a whole lot of drama happened with Malachi Black in AEW. As throughout Malachi's Black AEW run, it was rumored multiple times and had been kind of widely accepted that he wasn't going to stay in AEW, and the moment his AEW contract expired, he was going to go right back to WWE, where Triple H was now in control, who seemingly liked him when he used him in NXT, and it was going to work like that, like it had with many other signings at that time for WWE when Triple H took over. And matter of fact, Malachi Black had tried to leave AEW before, as in September of 2022, reports came out that Malachi Black had been granted a conditional release from AEW following a prior release quest the month prior being declined. And the conditions weren't known, but it was known that it was a heavily conditional release, whatever that even means. And Malachi Black himself would stroke the flames when he released his own statement saying that yes, he did indeed request his release from AEW amidst having some personal and private issues behind the scenes. And he also detailed a back injury he'd been dealing with for the better part of a year, as his statement reads, "I did indeed ask for my release. The last 2 years of my life have lended a lot to..." As part of his statement reads, "I did indeed ask for my release. The last 2 years of my life have lended to a lot of setbacks. Both me and my wife have been affected by uncontrollable actions from the outside that resulted in loss of life, medical setbacks, career jeopardizing, the suicide of a close friend, and a close family member almost losing their life. Then experiencing an injury that I was sure was the end of my career, I spent every week going through several sessions of rehab, dry needling, and therapy just to be able to walk and compete, now this being the tip of the iceberg, and with a combination of promises in my professional field that were not upheld, which resulted as a combination to all of these to a complete demoralization of life and career. This decision has been in my mind for the past 6 months. So a heavily loaded statement there where Malachi goes over a lot of private stuff he's been dealing with, and also kind of touches on promises not being kept in his professional field, seemingly alluding to AEW in some way. But then he also went on to say in this very statement that reports of there being a conditional release were false, so he requested it, but this conditional release that had been reported hadn't actually been granted apparently. He put, lastly, I have read a few narratives online in regards to my release, mental health, and my personal life that I can summarize swiftly. If it didn't come from me, it didn't happen. Stuff about conditional releases, stuff in my marriage, or using said mental health to leverage the other when, as I said before, that part wasn't even going to be part of the public conversation, are false. And Malachi Black would then also take to Instagram Live on September 27th to further clarify and hammer home that no, he had not been released by AEW and was not departing the company, despite most of those initial reports saying there was this conditional release. It's all very confusing.
My stuff about my conditional release, that it's false. So how are you guys still thinking, why are people still writing that I've got my release? Guys, I don't know how like, why do you trust these people to tell you the truth? None of it's confirmed. There's no confirmation because I haven't left. I'm not like, luckily I've been, and that's what this whole thing was about, I've been giving time off by Tony to take care of a bunch of stuff. All this stuff has been cleared up like weeks ago.
It was a strange situation all round, but things went silent and Malachi Black would stay off TV until he did indeed return, and that's when the House of Black won the trios titles, which is why I was kind of saying it seemed like a bit of a here damn reign, because not really much happened in that title reign either. And in around of September of 2023, fans started to take notice to the fact that Malachi Black in his AEW career had not wrestled a singles match in over a full year, and in fact only had 10 singles matches up to that point in his entire AEW career, which just sounded ridiculous, but yes, it was true. And fans would speculate that this was because of his back injury that we mentioned previously, and that he was in a trio with the House of Black to protect him from that, which Malachi Black would then take to Instagram to refute and say wasn't true, as he stated that his back was fine now and he had no idea why AEW wasn't booking him in singles matches, before going on to state he has other injuries too. The trend of no singles matches for Malachi Black was finally broken in February of 2024 when he finally was booked in one, but the conversations around Malachi Black's lack of singles matches in AEW would reignite drama once again at the start of 2024, as AEW fans on New Year's Day, do you guys not have anything better to do that day, were discussing Malachi Black's lack of one-on-ones, as they were talking about how many singles matches other House of Black members had compared to him, with someone replying to that tweet saying that's what happens when you refuse to take a pin or put anyone over. And this reply in particular here, accusing Malachi of refusing to do the JOB in AEW, would prompt a response from the King of the Black Throne himself. Usually I don't reply because these laughable takes from goofballs like this nerd is why this place is the equivalent of people opening their front doors and screaming their excrement-laced opinions into the street. However, bullshit, never happened, isn't a thing, Happy New Year. So the new narrative was that Malachi Black was difficult to work with, and that very much played into why Malachi's run had been a bust, but these claims were vigorously denied by both Malachi and his House of Black member Brody King as well, as throughout 2024 Malachi Black would stay wrestling in trios and tag action with the occasional singles match of course, and his last AEW singles match took place on the 6th of November Dynamite that year against Adam Cole, as after losing the match Malachi Black seemingly broke character to have a moment and embrace Adam Cole after being defeated by him, leading to many fans speculating that Malachi was done with AEW. However, once again, Malachi would come out and respond to this fan speculation saying no, this isn't the case, and he'd continue to wrestle for normal for AEW.
Touchdown, and again, everybody is, oh, he's retiring. He's retiring because of his injuries and this and that. Well, neither of these things. I'm not injured, nor am I retiring, nor am I leaving.
As his actual last match for AEW was only a month later, as he wrestled it at Full Gear 2024 and was not seen in AEW since then, with it being reported on the 10th of February 2025 that Malachi Black's contract had expired for AEW and he was finally departing from the company. And I mean, let's be real, we all knew exactly where he was going next. And indeed he did, as on the 25th of April SmackDown, he returned once again. As under the Aleister Black ring name once again, he returned to attack The Miz and became a member of the SmackDown roster, and would kick off his return with a feud with The Miz and then Damian Priest, winning both of them, a good start to life. But then after losing the return match to Damian Priest in an ambulance match, what did Aleister Black actually do following this? I genuinely can't think of anything. Well, he formed a little alliance with Zelina Vega, his real-life wife, but it kind of seems like that was only done because Zelina Vega also wasn't doing anything, so they just stuck him together. In February 2026, he would enter a feud with Randy Orton and would trade wins against each other, with him actually pinning Orton just recently in February. You know, Randy Orton being the guy that's about to main event WrestleMania against Cody Rhodes in the world title match, and matter of fact, apparently Aleister Black was actually penciled in to have an alliance with Orton heading into WrestleMania, but of course WWE and TKO decided to use Pat McAfee in that role instead, and Aleister Black was sent to the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal, which of course he didn't even win. And then on the Friday after WrestleMania, the very next week after that Andre the Giant Battle Royal, which ended up being his final match of course, he was released from the WWE alongside Zelina Vega, Kairi Sane, Zoe Stark, and a whole load of other talent as part of WWE's yearly Black Friday releases. And yeah, somehow, some way, his second WWE run was even worse than his AEW run. Make it make sense. Everybody thought that Aleister Black was going to have a home run WWE return because Triple H is now in control again, and he booked him great in NXT, but I guess he just wasn't the priority now. He returned, like I said, he did that feud with Damian Priest and then just floated around on the roster after, until finally it looked like he had something with Randy Orton, and then when they cancelled that, they didn't come up with a plan B for Aleister. They just said, nah, we wish you the best in your future endeavors, brother, see ya. And so yeah, now Malachi Black, Aleister Black, Tommy Yen, whatever you want to call him, is a free agent once again, and the AEW bridge is seemingly burnt, with Captain Sean Dean saying no to the idea of Malachi and Zelina running back the House of Black, and AEW World Champion MJF seemingly alluded to it as well, saying we don't want him. But companies like TNA and MLW, which seem like a good landing spot for Malachi at this point, to me seem kind of beneath him. I think his perfect home was in the WWE, and he's not there now, and they had no idea what to do with him. So what Malachi Black does next in his wrestling career is just totally unknown to me. Like I said, I think the most realistic landing points are TNA or MLW. I wouldn't be surprised to see him appear on either one of those, but man, I just can't believe how that second WWE run went down. I can't believe he was a part of those recent releases. His second run literally lasted less than a year. He came in on the 25th of April 2025 and was released on the 24th of April 2026. Less than a year, man. Just one day. I get it though. And yeah, like I said, what Malachi does next remains unknown, but it's got to be said, he has had a very storied and very strong wrestling career, and it is just kind of baffling that no one has been able to make it work since the NXT days. It seemed like he was set up and teed up perfectly following that NXT run and built up all of this momentum just for nothing. The man later known as Karrion Kross made his pro wrestling debut on the 6th of September 2014 under the name of Kevin Kross, and he would begin working the independent scene as he mostly worked across Nevada and Oregon to start his career off. As within less than a year, Kross was wrestling in Japan for the IGF as well as working on TV for Global Force Wrestling and doing dark matches for Lucha Underground. And then by 2017 he became a regular for Mexican promotion AAA, and going into 2018 he would tweak his ring name from Kevin Kross to Killer Kross. A move that proved to be very effective as well. Killer Kross is just a way better name than Kevin. And it's in this year he would begin working with Impact Wrestling, which would be his biggest role to date, as Kross was presented as very strong in his first year of the company and presented near the main event. He would also do some more work with Lucha Underground this year too, and actually on TV, not in dark matches, as in Lucha Underground, Killer Kross was known as the White Rabbit, being a part of the Rabbit Tribe, a rabbit-themed stable led by Paul London, and they feuded with the Reptile Tribe, a stable led by Thunder Rosa, aka Cobra Moon. They were a snake stable. That's right, Lucha Underground had an entire faction war between rabbits and snakes. Lucha Underground truly was weird and awesome. Going into 2019, Killer Kross would feud with Johnny Impact over the Impact World title, and though he was unsuccessful in his attempts, it was very apparent that TNA saw him as a main eventer as he was still being booked very strong. But this year would see some drama between Kross and TNA, as on May 13th it was reported that Kross had requested his TNA release. Apparently it came up during contract renegotiations and Kross was unhappy with his creative direction and his pay-per appearance deal that he was on, as TNA sensationally would actually decline Kross's request release, and after he finished up his program with Eddie Edwards soon after, he was taken off TV and benched by TNA, sitting on the shelf for months, not being allowed to work anywhere else and still being signed to TNA with his release being denied. And after months on the shelf, his release was finally granted to him at the end of the year in December, meaning Kross was now free to work wherever he wanted, with many major companies interested. Another important thing to mention about this time period pre-WWE is that this is when he would meet his future wife Scarlett Bordeaux, who was also a very talented wrestler in her own right. Scarlett's career began 2 years earlier than Kross's in 2012, and she was in TNA at the same time as Kross and would leave alongside him. As from this point on in both of their wrestling careers, Scarlett and Kross were now a package deal and an on-screen duo in every promotion they've been to since. As in 2020, it was confirmed that Kross had signed with WWE. It was not a surprising move whatsoever, and apparently he had help from Jon Moxley of all people, who gave him Triple H's contact. And throughout the following weeks on NXT, Kross and Scarlett would make several cameos and background appearances on NXT as their arrival was being teased, and on the 6th of May they would officially arrive in NXT, being equipped with the best entrance in the business at that time and some unreal presentation. As very quickly Kross, now called Karrion Kross in WWE, would start building momentum and picking up wins. As right out the gate, Karrion Kross wasn't just beating anybody and squashing any old jabroni, but he was beating some of NXT's biggest stars and was instantly presented as a top guy on the yellow brand. And after defeating Tommaso Ciampa at In Your House, he would set his sights on Keith Lee and his NXT title, as the two would face off at NXT TakeOver 30 for the big yellow belt, with Karrion Kross defeating Keith Lee to become the NXT champion in what was a big moment for him and a very quick rise and ascension to the top of the brand. He was being booked so strong on a crazy win streak and looked to be having a very long reign with the NXT title, but unfortunately for Kross, he injured his shoulder during the course of the match with Keith Lee, and thus he was forced to vacate the belt instantly, holding it for only 4 days. And he would return back to NXT from injury in December, and after a couple of months he would win the title back for his second NXT title reign, defeating Finn Balor to win the belt back, and it's during this time where things got weird and bad for Karrion Kross. First of all, as champion, he would have a feud with Adam Cole for the belt, and they had a promo segment on NXT that went down in infamy as Adam Cole just totally buried him on the mic. This brand has done everything in their power to make you feel special. You got the cool music, you got the lights, you got the fog machine, you got the girl. You know what they do to make Adam Cole feel special? They ring the freaking bell. Whilst the goal of this promo was obviously to big up Adam Cole and build hype for him, all it ended up doing was just totally exposing Cross, and I have no idea why they wrote this promo like this. Adam Cole may as well have got on the mic and just straight up called him an entrance merchant, and it would have had the exact same effect as this promo. Another thing that happened during this reign is that in July he would randomly appear on Raw while still the NXT champion, as he had a whole new presentation and outfit that just looked stupid on him. And not only that, but in this debut on Raw he would face Jeff Hardy and get totally squashed and jabronied by Jeff Hardy in just 2 minutes. This was his first pinfall defeat in WWE as the NXT champion in an unannounced Raw match. That is just rough and terrible booking from WWE. And WWE rightfully got a lot of shit for this, as he lost the belt soon after and would go full time on Raw, as his presentation and aura was just totally neutered. It was insane to see, and a crazy contrast from just a couple of months ago with how he was looking in NXT. His career had gone totally off the rails, as had his presentation. He was totally watered down, and this was seemingly another case of Vince McMahon on the main roster just undoing all the hard work of NXT. And on November 4th, Cross and Scarlett would both be released by WWE during their budget cuts, which was a crazy turn of events for what was a dominant run and a guy booked so strong just a matter of months ago. But the way they had massacred him on the main roster, it ended up not even coming as a surprise when he did get released. They just completely killed his WWE career in the matter of just a couple of months. As Cross would return back to the indies in 2022 and also did some work with Major League Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, and none other than the goated wrestling promotion, Control Your Narrative. Who needs WWE when you have Control Your Narrative, right? Well, clearly Killer Cross, because it was this year that Triple H came into power over Vince, and with that, many of his favorites were re-signed back to WWE, including Karrion Kross and Scarlett, who had returned back to WWE on the August 5th episode of SmackDown and had no hesitation in leaving Control Your Narrative, because of course they didn't. He was now sporting the long hair, and he confronted WWE Champion Roman Reigns and Drew McIntyre in what was a big way to come back, going face to face with the Tribal Chief. As it seemed as though maybe they were teasing something with Cross and Roman Reigns, but this potential program just ended up never happening. Instead, he feuded with Drew McIntyre with the 2 training wins, and Drew ultimately winning the feud in the end. As himself and Scarlett were drafted to SmackDown from here, and they had a brief feud with AJ Styles, but in all honesty, he wasn't really doing all that much and just kind of coasting around for the first period of his WWE return. At the start of 2024 though, Karrion Kross alongside Scarlett, AOP and Paul Ellering would form a faction called the Final Testament, and they would enter into a feud with Bobby Lashley, who, joined by the Street Profits, would form a temporary stable called the Pride, and the Pride would defeat them at that year's WrestleMania. After that, they were drafted to Raw and they feuded with the New Day, with the 2 factions having several bouts and trading wins back and forth, but the feud ending with the New Day and then Odyssey Jones defeating the Final Testament, with the group losing again. And a few months later, the Final Testament would disband after AOP and Ellering were released from WWE, so all in all, the Final Testament were just a total bust of a stable and really served no purpose other than to fill time. But right after this, and now a solo act once again, Kross would transition into the most interesting period of his second WWE run, as he debuted his new Devil's Advocate character. Essentially, he would just linger around backstage and shoehorn himself between 2 people feuding, encouraging them to embrace their darker side, essentially like a devil on a shoulder. These names included Sami Zayn and AJ Styles, with Cross really taking over the AJ Styles and Logan Paul WrestleMania feud, really becoming the most interesting part of it, and he wasn't even in the match. Cross would indeed get involved in their Mania 41 match, which ended up being totally awful, with Logan Paul coming out on top in the worst match on the entire card, as Styles clearly didn't take Karrion's advice. And WrestleMania 41 as an entire package, both nights, both shows, were just absolutely awful as a whole, and coming out of it, there was really no hype for anyone, except for Karrion Kross. As on the WrestleMania recap show, Karrion Kross would cut a work shoot promo criticizing the company and his own booking. And this promo went mega viral online and was a very highly acclaimed promo, really causing a huge surge of popularity in his favor. Just from a post-Mania promo that didn't even air anywhere popular, Karrion Kross was maybe now the most over person in the entire company. This Devil's Advocate character now had potential to be huge. This was the most interesting thing in WWE at this time, and people really wanted to see him get a push from it. But instead though, what we got was Karrion Kross continuing in the backstage segments, but never wrestling on TV unless it was on main event. Although Karrion Kross would resume his feud with Sami Zayn, and the two would face off on PLE, with the first match happening at Night of Champions and Sami Zayn getting the W, and the two would rematch on Raw, with Karrion Kross getting his win back in what was only his second Raw match of the year. A very puzzling decision given the reactions that he was getting, and this is when rumours were circulating that Kross wasn't able to take a back bump and that is why he was hardly working on TV. But this was just completely false and clearly a bad excuse by WWE fans to justify his poor booking. However, what was true and what everyone was aware of is that Karrion Kross's contract was coming up not too long after SummerSlam, and with a match set between him and Sami at SummerSlam, there was a lot of interest in that match. It was still uncertain whether he was going to be re-signed, and people thought that maybe the SummerSlam match could play into a potential fake departure storyline or anything going on later, as Kross and Zayn would face off at SummerSlam in their big blow-off match, with Sami Zayn getting the win, and sure enough, this would just end up being Kross's final match and appearance in WWE. No storyline around it, no big win over Sami Zayn before he continues on in WWE. No, he simply departed from WWE alongside Scarlett as their contracts expired on August 10th, and they were just gone from WWE. And of course, their departures were met with major backlash, as Kross goes down as a guy who got punished by WWE for getting over on his own. Many such cases. And since leaving WWE, Karrion Kross has released his own documentary series and done various interviews where he discusses what really went down backstage in the final months of his WWE career. Firstly, there was apparently many backstage figures that thought his post-Mania promo was a 100% real shoot, and they were upset by that. And it's also said that there was no real communication about a contract or negotiations for months leading up to SummerSlam, and it was only at the last minute that he was offered a new deal. A deal that he was only given 24 hours to accept, and didn't include Scarlett being re-signed, and so the offer just wasn't good enough, and so he didn't sign it and left. Kross has stated that he's open to returning to WWE, and that could happen in the future, but right now he's back to working the indies all across the world and is the current MLW World Champion. And I've done multiple videos discussing both Kross's indie run and reviewing MLW, which I will leave links down below and on the end screen of this video. And yeah, you just have to question WWE's motives in regards to the final months of Karrion Kross's WWE career, because it very much seems like they weren't happy and didn't want Kross to be getting the reactions that he was. Regardless of what you think of Karrion Kross as a worker, you cannot deny just how over he was towards the end of his WWE run, and regardless of what you think of him, he got over on his own. The live crowds loved him and he was getting insane reactions. That should have counted for something. But as we all know, WWE does not like when a wrestler gets over on their own, and so his WWE run would end on a whimper. Karrion Kross is of course back to the Killer Kross name, and he still continues to appear on promotions alongside Scarlett Bordeaux and is still doing some very good work in my opinion. But we will never know what could have been if WWE just bit the bullet and continued to ride the wave of momentum that Karrion Kross had created for himself, because he could be a big star in WWE right now in an alternate reality. Johnny Gargano made his pro wrestling debut in 2005 and quickly would become a journeyman and a stalwart of the US independent wrestling scene, as he was wrestling for mostly lower level regional American indie promotions. Literally anyone that you could think of, he probably worked there for the next few years, working with a who's who of opponents in the 2000s indie wrestling scene. It's during this time he wrestled many tryout matches for various promotions on TV, namely Total Nonstop Action and Ring of Honor, with neither materializing. And it was after his Ring of Honor tryout that a hairline fracture in his back was found, with Gargano being advised by his doctors to rethink his career path. But alas, in typical Johnny Gargano underdog fighting spirit style, he was back 6 months later and he's never looked back since. And it was in the 2010s when Johnny Gargano would start to become a regular on some of the more recognizable indie promotions, namely Chikara, Dragon Gate both in the US and Japan, and of course PWG, aka Pro Wrestling Guerrilla. As between 2013 and 2015, Johnny Gargano worked for Pro Wrestling Guerrilla in Southern California, and he really was part of an era of guys in wrestling that really went on to transform the business with their style of work in PWG. With so many guys from this era of PWG being some of the biggest stars on wrestling TV right now and of the last few years. As during his time in PWG, Johnny Gargano wrestled many a banger match, working with guys like Kevin Steen, the Young Bucks, Adam Cole, Ricochet, Kyle O'Reilly, Candice LeRae, and of course Tommaso Ciampa, with the two of them forming a tag team in the middle of 2015 and wrestling some matches together towards the end of their respective PWG runs, and I don't think many people could have predicted just how big this team was about to rise to be. But believe it or not, this team didn't actually start or be formed in PWG, but rather it started months prior in WWE NXT. As throughout the years, Johnny Gargano of course also had numerous WWE cameos in extra roles like many current top stars did, and it wasn't until 2015 when he got an official tryout, and interestingly enough, he wasn't signed to a contract just yet, but would continue to make NXT appearances for the next couple of months anyway, while still doing the indies. This is a rare thing that WWE did. I don't think they've ever done this since. It was definitely rare for the time as well, where they had these wrestlers on these tier 2 deals where they could still work on the independent wrestling scene, and they were part-timers in WWE. Obviously Gargano had this deal, Ciampa had this deal, I can also recall Blue Pants had this deal and got heat for having it. And it's that year in 2015 when himself and Tommaso Ciampa would enter the Dusty Rhodes Tag Team Classic, and that is when the two of them officially forms that team. They did win their first round match and made it to the quarterfinals before they lost to Baron Corbin and Rhino. Okay, that sounds like an awesome team, I don't remember that. And both Gargano and Ciampa would officially go full-time with WWE in 2016, and they really came in at the perfect time, with both men taking part in that year's Cruiserweight Classic, a tournament consisting of many unsigned independent wrestling talents and them two who were actually signed. Literally just a tournament made for them. It was perfect. Unfortunately, they were matched against each other in the first round, with Gargano winning, but he did get knocked out by eventual winner TJ Perkins in the next round. And now, as a full-time team in NXT, the world was their oyster, and they would officially get themselves a tag team name, that of course being DIY. And DIY would pick up steam quick, with a feud against NXT Tag Team Champs The Revival putting them on the map immediately, as they first faced off at NXT TakeOver Brooklyn 2, with the Revival winning in a match that was considered the greatest tag team match ever in WWE by many at that time, until their second match, which took place at NXT TakeOver Toronto, which then snatched that chain as DIY would defeat the Revival in a crazy 2 out of 3 falls match to win the belt, and they were made men just like that. And they had a decent tag title reign, though it was definitely a lot shorter than many people may have thought it would be. They made a couple of defenses. First, they had yet another match against the Revival to complete the trilogy. It wasn't as critically as acclaimed as the others, but still pretty decent. And they also defended the belts against TM61 and Akira Tozawa and Tajiri. Now that is an awesome team, before losing them to the Authors of Pain in January 2017. And after DIY failed to regain the belts at both TakeOver Orlando and TakeOver Chicago, Tommaso Ciampa would turn on Johnny Gargano in one of the most iconic heel turns in modern day WWE. One of those moments you remember exactly watching it, and the little signature graphic at the bottom right faking everyone out, many people switching off the show before the big turn happened. And this was meant to kick off a big feud between Johnny Gargano and Tommaso Ciampa, of course. However, Ciampa was unfortunately injured and had to step away for a bit immediately following. And Gargano would continue on chugging along in the background though, as it's during this time he had his big match with Andrade at TakeOver Philadelphia, a match that got the illustrious 5-star rating from Dave Meltzer, the first match in WWE in 7 years to do so, not since Punk vs Cena at Money in the Bank. And after he lost this match, Ciampa would return attacking him, finally kicking off their feud, and this feud was definitely a big one and a major part of NXT history. As Gargano would rematch Andrade once again, this time in a title versus career match, and following Tommaso Ciampa interference, Gargano lost this match and had to kayfabe leave NXT. This of course set up an unsanctioned match between himself and Ciampa for the next takeover, where if Gargano did win, he would get reinstated. He of course won. Ciampa however would win the return match, and before the end of the year they would have a third match to complete the trilogy, this time for the NXT title which Ciampa now held, and he would win this match too. As it wasn't Johnny Gargano's time just quite yet, and shortly after this, Johnny Gargano would go through a major change in his career as he would turn heel for the first time in WWE. He was revealed to be a mystery attacker towards Aleister Black, kicking off a feud between the two of them that Aleister Black did indeed win, and this heel run was a bit of a weird one because Johnny Gargano just started losing a lot more, and it felt like it was an excuse to have him lose more matches, which he did a lot. He would however win his first bit of singles gold with the NXT North American title in 2019, but he lost it literally 4 days later. Unlucky. And then at the start of 2019 as well, himself and Ciampa were randomly called up to the main roster, but also not really. It was just temporary, making a couple of appearances, with them both all of a sudden baby faces again and teaming up with each other, with their past just not being addressed. 2019, man, weird times, just a horrible time for the product, nearly as bad as 2026. Obviously I'm exaggerating, but now a babyface once again, Johnny Gargano would get his shot at the vacant NXT title against Adam Cole, with this match happening at WrestleMania weekend and it being one of the most polarizing WWE matches ever. I hated it. I hate this match, my word. As Johnny Gargano would defeat Adam Cole in literally the ultimate underdog of all underdog performances, kicking out of literally everything. And after this, the Johnny Gargano fatigue was very real for me. How much more of an underdog babyface could this guy be after that match? He literally had done everything possible in that match and his prior NXT career. What more could he do? But seemingly Johnny Gargano was an NXT lifer, as he would spend the next few years in NXT and remain there, and though he would lose the belt to Adam Cole in the next defense, he really didn't do much in those 2 years. This time period for Johnny Gargano in NXT post losing the NXT title to Adam Cole was definitely just one big blur. He spent a fair bit of the time injured, he reunited with Ciampa again, he turned heel once again, feuded with Ciampa again, and himself and his wife Candice LeRae teamed up a lot with their faction The Way alongside Indy Hartwell and Austin Theory, in fairness being one of the better parts of NXT during this time and a highlight of Johnny Gargano's NXT run. In late 2021 though, chatter around Johnny Gargano and Candice LeRae's contracts would arise though, with it looking like neither of them were going to re-sign, and that ended up being the case, with both opting to take some time away to spend some time with their newborn, and it was definitely a sudden exit for sure though. though. Two big parts, two pillars of NXT just both gone from the company just like that, and you never know, they might not return. And I mean, with a certain other wrestling promotion that's also on TV, there was only one place that Johnny Wrestling was going to end up post WWE, and with a wildcard spot in the 2022 Owen Hart Cup, the AEW debut was all laid out and ready for Johnny Elite? Yeah, John Morrison debuted for AEW at this time, not Johnny Gargano. John Morrison, Johnny Elite, was the wild card in the Owen Hart tournament. With many people in the crowd and watching on TV getting the scare of their lives watching this, seeing Johnny appear on the Tron before Elite appeared right after, with all of us thinking it was Gargano. Literally all of us thought this. Even AEW's social media guy thought so. But alas, Gargano would indeed return back to the Fed, making his return back to WWE in August of 2022, having made no appearances elsewhere in the time that he was gone. And his return run started off a bit slow. He feuded with former stablemate Austin Theory, he competed in a chamber match, he made a quick cameo NXT return, but then he got a shoulder injury and had to go away for 5 months. When he came back though, it was alongside Ciampa once again, as DIY were back and finally on the main roster full time, and with Triple H in control, this was it. This was the time, and this was when DIY was surely gonna get a major push. As DIY did have numerous attempts at the tag titles on Raw, but they just couldn't get the job done. However, quickly after being drafted to SmackDown in 2024, they did get the job done, and they won the tag titles from A-Town Down Under, only to lose them 28 days later to the Bloodline in typical Gargano fashion. But lucky for them, they would win them back before the year ended, as they defeated the Motor City Machine Guns after turning heel during the course of this match to win the titles back, and I'm noticing a pattern here. And I mean, this reign was definitely a lot better than their last one. It went 98 days as opposed to 28 days before they lost them to the Street Profits, and they rematched them for the belts in one of the best matches of the year, a triple threat TLC match on SmackDown, also involving the Machine Guns. This match was awesome, and then they also were in the 6-pack tag TLC match at SummerSlam, in what can maybe be looked at as the last 2 instances of WWE caring about tag team wrestling, literally ever. And I mean, after this, it was all downhill for Johnny Gargano, as DIY quickly fell into irrelevancy and weren't getting into any storylines or doing much things with any heat on TV. And going into 2026, Tommaso Ciampa would announce his departure from WWE, thus disbanding DIY and leaving Johnny Gargano as a singles act, and oh boy, it has not been good since. As whilst Ciampa has switched over and signed for AEW and has held a belt there and is putting on banger after banger matches in AEW and main eventing shows, Gargano is a total jobber in WWE and maybe at the worst point of his career thus far, as he's doing this weird pessimist, depressed introvert gimmick where he just lies down all depressed and sad and doesn't say anything and is just totally defeated in a we're so over doomer mode. And I mean, no sugarcoating it, it's just terrible. And I mean, sure, this could go somewhere, but nothing's happened so far. He's still just a total jobber, and I don't really trust WWE to make this follow up with anything, and even so, there is no heat around it. Nobody is enjoying this gimmick. At this current moment in time, it really seems like Gargano has hit a brick wall in the WWE, and they've just ran out of ideas for him. And it's shocking to say the least. I mean, when Gargano came back, it seemed like the perfect storm. Triple H was now in control, and he was Triple H's boy. But with many examples like Tommaso Ciampa, like Aleister Black, it's very apparent that many of Triple H's perceived favourites maybe weren't that, and they haven't gotten the big opportunities and big pushes that many thought they would upon WWE returns. And with how Tommaso Ciampa is doing in AEW and how Johnny Gargano's WWE career has hit a wall, you have to look at the possibility of a future AEW signing for Johnny Gargano. It's definitely still a possibility. We all know that nobody's jobs are safe in WWE anymore except for like a select few 5 people. Johnny Gargano is not one of those 5 people, so I definitely could see him popping up in AEW and joining up with Ciampa once again. And whilst Johnny Gargano's run in WWE since returning has not been very good, don't even get me started on Candice LeRae. Born and raised in Riverside, California, Candice LeRae spent a good chunk of her childhood watching and enjoying professional wrestling alongside her brothers, and that would obviously compel her to want to become a professional wrestler herself, which she would go on to do as she made her debut in 2002 for the Californian promotion Empire Wrestling Federation. And she would spend the first few years of her wrestling career, as you'd expect, just working for the EWF and other regional indie wrestling promotions in the California scene, but it was in 2006 when she began to work for a certain promotion in Southern California that would take her career to the next level. That, of course, was PWG, aka Pro Wrestling Guerrilla. As PWG has never exactly been known for its women's wrestling, and Candice LeRae to this day remains the longest serving and one of the only female wrestlers to ever appear for PWG. And whilst in PWG, Candice LeRae would work with many of the top future stars of the industry and top independent wrestling talent at the time, which really helped to further her name, as she would broaden her work to other of the top indie companies at the time like Ring of Honor and Chikara. And in the 2010s, Candice LeRae's stocks would rise even higher through the roof, thanks in big part to the growth of PWG, as by this point in the 2010s, PWG had really established themselves as the premier indie wrestling promotion and the ultimate indie supercard show, as there was a major phenomenon around the style of wrestling going on in PWG, and so many people in this company would literally go on to change the entire business. Because as I said before, nearly every top star in the industry today, they had a run in PWG in 2014. And there's a good chance they worked with or against Candice LeRae as well, and it was Candice LeRae's match against the Young Bucks in 2014 where she really proved that she could hang and established herself as one of the top unsigned names. Candice LeRae made huge waves on the independent scene, and as more independent wrestlers and those around her began signing with the WWE in the next few years joining NXT, it felt inevitable that she would eventually do the same and sign as well. And that would finally happen on the May 3rd, 2017 episode of NXT, where Candice LeRae made her televised in-ring debut in a Battle Royal. Although she did not win, it marked her first official involvement with the WWE, and what a perfect time to get involved, as 2017 would also see the Mae Young Classic taking place. That, of course, being the all-women's tournament featuring some of the upcoming WWE women's wrestlers and top indie wrestling talent, and of course Candice LeRae was involved, as she would defeat Renee Michelle in the first round and then Nicole Savoy in the second round before being eliminated in the quarterfinals by eventual finalist Shayna Baszler. It wouldn't be until January 16, 2018 though that Candice LeRae would officially sign with the WWE. Of course, by this point she had made numerous appearances and her husband Johnny Gargano was also full-time and established in the company already. So upon joining WWE, she would go straight to NXT and was immediately inserted in the feud between Johnny Gargano and Andrade Cien Almas, as this led to her first NXT singles match against Zelina Vega on the April 18th, 2018 episode of NXT, where Candice LeRae would pick up the victory in her NXT debut. And following that, she would become a little more active in the women's division, facing competitors such as Bianca Belair, Nikki Cross, Kairi Sane, and some others on NXT. However, she really wasn't as active as a wrestler she could be, and she was much largely portrayed more as just a supporting character in Johnny Gargano's storylines and as his manager rather than a singles wrestler on her own. And going into 2019, Candice would make her main roster debut as she appeared as an entrant in the 2019 Women's Royal Rumble match, entering at number 17 and lasting around 9 minutes. And this year would see Candice LeRae finally begin to step out of Gargano's shadow and become more involved in the women's division as a singles worker and not just the sidekick to Johnny Gargano, as Candice LeRae instead became the sidekick of Io Shirai, who was in a feud with Shayna Baszler over the NXT Women's Championship. As Io Shirai and Shayna Baszler would face off for the NXT Women's Championship on the June 26, 2019 episode of NXT, with Io Shirai taking the loss and Shayna Baszler picking up the win. And following the loss, tensions were at an all-time high, and Io Shirai would turn heel on Candice LeRae, turning on her and attacking her, officially beginning a feud between the two of them. As this rivalry very much was Candice LeRae's first truly meaningful feud in the WWE, and really the first chance for her herself to showcase herself properly to the WWE audience, as it led to her pay-per-view debut as she faced off with Io Shirai at NXT TakeOver Toronto 2019, where Io Shirai would defeat Candice LeRae in an outstanding match. A great match where Candice LeRae got to shine. Despite the loss, she still looked good. And Candice continued building momentum afterwards as she challenged Shayna Baszler for the NXT Women's Championship on television, her first title match in NXT, though she was unsuccessful. She also competed in the Women's 2019 War Games match at NXT TakeOver War Games 2019 as part of Rhea Ripley's team, as despite the odds stacked against them, they went on to win, and Candice LeRae really is a veteran of the women's War Games matches in WWE. I think she's been in 3 or 4 of them. And then not too long after this, she represented NXT at Survivor Series as part of the Brand Warfare Women's Tag match, where she also came out victorious, so everything was coming up Candice. And 2020 would end up being one of the biggest years of Candice LeRae's WWE career, as it featured a major change and a major shift in Candice LeRae's character in WWE. As on the April 8th, 2020 episode of NXT, she would turn heel for the first time in WWE by helping Johnny Gargano defeat Tommaso Ciampa. It would see her realign with Johnny Gargano once again, which was a bit annoying, but Candice LeRae was still very much a single star and doing her own thing during this time at the very least as well. And alongside the heel turn came a completely new look and entrance theme and aesthetic for Candice LeRae, and it looked awesome. Her first feud as a heel was with Mia Yim, where she defeated her in a street fight at NXT The Great American Bash. I actually have this weird Candice LeRae plaque from this match that I got from WWE Shop at the time, and I just forgot to refund it and it arrived a year later. Funny story. And later that year she would challenge Io Shirai, her old foe, once again for the NXT Women's Championship, as Io was now champion and their face heel roles were reversed, as she would first challenge her at NXT TakeOver 31, but she failed to win, though she received another title opportunity at NXT Halloween Havoc in a tables, ladders and chairs match, and in a match that I really thought Candice LeRae was finally gonna win and get the NXT Women's Gold, she unfortunately did not. Oh my god, was I pissed off about this at the time. Now that I think about it, I still kind of am, though obviously this match was absolutely awesome. And across those 2 matches against Io Shirai, Indy Hartwell was interfering on Candice's behalf and helping her out, while Shotzi Blackheart was interfering against Candice LeRae and opposing her, which began both an alliance with Indy Hartwell and then a feud with Shotzi Blackheart. With this storyline culminating at NXT War Games 2020, where Team Candice would defeat Team Shotzi in a War Games match, earning Candice the nickname of the War Games Queen, and she really is. You can't dispute that, as Candice LeRae and Indy Hartwell's alliance would continue on, and eventually they would be joined by Johnny Gargano and Austin Theory to form the faction known as The Way, which may be widely considered the peak of Candice LeRae's WWE run, and this really was one of the best parts of NXT TV at the time. The Way were absolutely awesome. I gotta hand it to this stable. Candice LeRae and Indy Hartwell would go on to compete in the 2021 Women's Dusty Rhodes Tag Team Classic for the new NXT Women's Tag Titles. Remember when those were a thing? They got eliminated in the semi-finals, but they did make a bit of history, being the first ever women's match on 205 Live, as they defeated Cora Jade and Gigi Dolan in an opening round match. And then on the May 4th, 2021 episode of NXT, Candice LeRae and Indy Hartwell would defeat Ember Moon and Shotzi Blackheart to win the NXT Women's Tag Team Championships, finally giving Candice her first championship victory. The match was awesome, a great hardcore match between the two, and it was a totally earned title victory for both Candice LeRae and Indy Hartwell, as I said, The Way were absolutely awesome. Unfortunately, their title reign was a bit underwhelming though, not really anyone's fault though, as Candice LeRae and Indy Hartwell would never successfully defend the titles, and they would lose them just over 2 months later to Io Shirai and Zoe Stark at the Great American Bash 2021. And not long after losing the titles, it was announced that Candice LeRae and Johnny Gargano were expecting their first child. Candice LeRae was pregnant, so understandable there wasn't a long title reign, I guess. And Candice would remain under WWE contract during maternity leave, but on May 6th, 2022, her contract contract would officially expire and she chose not to renew it, and the same happened with Johnny Gargano, who would also exit from the WWE. And obviously for several months speculation would surround her future, with fans wondering would she return to WWE or would she sign with AEW. Me personally, I was really hoping to see her sign with AEW, but eventually when Triple H took over WWE Creative, he brought back a lot of his NXT boys and the released WWE wrestlers under Vince, and of course Candice LeRae and Johnny Gargano were a part of that, and they made their WWE returns. As Candice LeRae returned to the WWE on the September 26, 2022 episode of Monday Night Raw as a babyface, defeating Nikki ASH in her first match. Remember that character? And for the start of her second WWE run now on the main roster, it wasn't the worst start of all time for Candice LeRae, as she would briefly feud with Damage Control and even picked up TV wins over Dakota Kai and Bayley. However, very quickly that momentum would just fade and her television appearances became way more infrequent, with most of her appearances ending in losses and any victory would occur on main event rather than Raw. A big part of this may have been because Vince McMahon made his return to WWE Creative Influence at that time, so her TV time maybe became more limited because of that. Triple H would obviously retake over though, thank God, and Candice LeRae and Indy Hartwell would then begin to team on the main roster, bringing back that Way duo. But despite at a certain point being literally one of the only actual teams in the division, they were just never given any sort of push or anything meaningful to sink their teeth into as a tag team. The only thing I can remember from Candice LeRae and Indy Hartwell's tag team run on the main roster was when Candice LeRae randomly turned heel in 2024 during a tag team match against Maxine and I think Natalia, as she just randomly went full Christian Cage mode on Maxine during the match, randomly giving a promo to her about her dead brother for some reason. Hey, at the very least, if this led to something for Candice LeRae, then cool, but obviously it literally didn't, and this was never followed up on whatsoever. She literally just went sicko mode on Maxine for literally no reason whatsoever. 2024 though would end up being somewhat of a busy and successful year for Candice LeRae though, as in October of this year she would finally win her first WWE singles belt, the WWE Speed title. You know, the one where they only aired the matches on Twitter in 3-minute matches. Yeah, she won that one. And shortly after as well, Indy Hartwell would get released from the WWE, thus ending her team with Candice, as LeRae would instead take up an alliance with Women's Champion Nia Jax. And sure, it was a sidekick role once again, but at least it was with a pushed wrestler in her division, and it meant she got to have more exposure and work nearer to the main event scene. She of course worked the Women's War Games match that year once again as the War Games Queen return, and going into 2025, herself and Nia Jax would feud with Tiffany Stratton and Trish Stratus. Try saying that 3 times in a row really quickly. Tiffany Stratton and Trish Stratus. Tiffany Stratton and Trish Stratus. Tiffany Stratton and Trish Stratus. But following the conclusion of that feud and both Nia and Candice losing their titles, the alliance between the two would fizzle out and Candice LeRae would go right back to being a jobber and hardly ever wrestling. Matter of fact, since losing the Speed title in April of 2025, she's just had 9 televised matches, and 2 of them were Battle Royals, 3 of them were on main event, 2 of them were under Speed rules, and 1 was the Royal Rumble. Candice LeRae has only had 1 singles match on the main roster in the last year, which is just crazy. And if you don't know what Candice LeRae is doing right now in WWE, she of course is right back to being a side character in whatever the hell Johnny Gargano is doing, which is of course this weird ass depression gimmick that he's been doing since February and has done nothing for anyone other than depress the fans and me. I'm very depressed seeing Candice do this shit. And that's really where we are now. She has not wrestled a match since the 27th of February episode of SmackDown nearly 4 months ago. And all she does is appear in these random backstage segments of Johnny Gargano planking on random objects being all depressed. Ha ha ha, hilarious. And yeah, I think the constant theme and the main issue I've always had with Candice LeRae's WWE run is that she's never really been on her own. I liked the way and her and Indy were alright as a tag team, but I just want to see Candice LeRae away from Johnny Gargano or any tag team partner and just as a singles wrestler on her own, face or heel. But at this point, it's 2026, that ship has totally sailed, and at this point, there's no way WWE could ever see her in a singles role. It just feels like it's way too late now. And obviously, we're at a point in WWE where nobody's jobs are safe other than like a handful of people. The recent releases that took place in WWE proved that. And as much as I really do hate to say it, I wouldn't be surprised to see Johnny Gargano or Candice LeRae in any of these future budget cuts. It sucks to say, but honestly. Candice LeRae will always be one of my favorites though, and I still pray that hopefully one day we can see her holding a title again in the WWE, or potentially AEW in the future if that is a possibility. Well, I do think the ship may have sailed with WWE. I think AEW, that door would absolutely still be open for her, as AEW I think would just be the perfect style for Candice LeRae to just be a straight up singles wrestler on her own, and with many of her ex-PWG comrades working there, I could still see that happening, and I am hopeful that one day it could. But yeah, as of right now, there is just nothing to be excited about with Candice LeRae's WWE career. It has just been 3 months of non-stop, terrible backstage segments. Obviously, before ever making it to WWE, Tommaso Ciampa began his career in 2005 on the independent scene, initially being trained by Killer Kowalski. And within just a year of working, he was already making cameos and doing extra appearances for WWE like many top stars do in their early career. And after just a couple of years, it was announced in February of 2007 that he had signed a developmental deal with the WWE as he would report to OVW, aka Ohio Valley Wrestling. And now, under the name of simply just Tommaso, he would work with the acclaimed likes of Matt Cardona, Teddy Hart, Nick Nemeth, Vladimir Kozlov, and best for last, Bam Neely. However, he did never make it past the developmental phase of WWE in this first run, as he only made it 6 months in WWE at this point before he was released in August of the same year, ending his first run with WWE. And so Ciampa would return back to the indies, and after a few years of advancing through the indie scene in the States, he began working with Ring of Honor in 2011, which were the premier independent wrestling promotion at this point. And unlike Gargano, who only made a few appearances for Ring of Honor, Tommaso Ciampa had an extensive run with Ring of Honor and was an established guy there, as he first started out Ring of Honor as part of the Embassy faction being led by Prince Nana of all people, and would actually go on a long undefeated singles streak after signing, where he went on for about a year and a half before he finally lost in singles action to Jay Lethal. At the end of 2013, he would win his one and only belt in Ring of Honor, that being the Ring of Honor television title, and he defended this belt against Jay Lethal, Matt Taven, and Hanson, before then losing the belt to Jay Lethal at the 2014 Supercard show. And he would spend the next year mostly working as a heel and dealing with a couple of injuries before departing Ring of Honor in 2015 for good, and at the same time he was of course also working for PWG at the same time he was doing Ring of Honor. PWG of course being that Southern Californian independent wrestling promotion that is kind of infamous for shaping wrestling as we know it today, with many of today's top stars having worked in PWG under that work rate style you see today. And 2015 would also be the year that saw him start working with WWE once again, as at first it was on a part-time basis. He was actually on a secondary tier contract where he was allowed to work the indies at the same time whilst working for WWE, which is pretty unheard of nowadays, but he wasn't the only one on this kind of deal, as Johnny Gargano was also on this kind of deal, and it's here where they were first paired up as a team, and this is where both of their careers obviously would really take a drastic turn and go on a very far upward trajectory. Obviously a lot of this we have discussed already in my Gargano video, so I'll try and keep the DIY stuff concise. As the part-time deals for Ciampa and Gargano officially went full-time in 2016, with both of them signing just in time for the Cruiserweight Classic. Of course, in the Cruiserweight Classic they would face each other, and right after that the team would really get going in NXT and really establish themselves, as now as a full-time team in NXT the world was their oyster, and they would officially get themselves a name, that of course being DIY. And DIY as a tag team act would pick up steam very quickly with a feud against the Revival, who were the tag champions, putting them on the map instantly, as in the first match, which was a classic, they were defeated by the Revival at TakeOver TakeOver Brooklyn 2, which many considered to be the best tag match in WWE ever, until their second match, which then overtook it at NXT TakeOver Toronto, with DIY getting the win. So just like that, they were tag champions and made men in WWE so damn quickly. And as tag champions, they would defend the belts against the Revival again, as well as TM61 and Akira Tozawa and Tajiri, before losing the belts to the Authors of Pain in January of 2017. And after failing to regain the titles at NXT TakeOver Orlando, a show that I was at, and TakeOver Chicago, Ciampa would finally have enough and turn on Gargano in one of the most iconic heel turns in modern day WWE. We all remember this one. And obviously this was set to kick off a feud between them. However, Ciampa immediately after announced that he was injured and had to step away for a bit, so it would put that feud on the back burner for a second, as Gargano would continue chugging along in the background on his own during this time though, as he had that big match with Andrade at TakeOver Philadelphia, the 5-star one that he did lose, with Ciampa returning right after, attacking him and finally kicking off their big feud. As after losing to Andrade once more in a title versus Korea match following Ciampa interference, Gargano had to kayfabe leave NXT, which would then of course set up an unsanctioned match with Ciampa, where if he won, he would get reinstated back to WWE, and of course Johnny Gargano picked up the win over Ciampa in this first match. However, in the return match, Ciampa would get the win to even the scores 1-1. And soon after that, he would continue that momentum going as he would defeat Malachi Black on an episode of NXT to win the NXT title, a huge moment for Ciampa, who was now the top of NXT and one of the best heels in the game at this point. As before the end of the year, Johnny Gargano and Tommaso Ciampa would have their third match to complete the trilogy, obviously now for the NXT title, and Aleister Black was originally set to be a part of this, making it a three-way match, but he did get injured, so it went back to a one-on-one between the DIY boys, and Ciampa got the win in a last man standing match to end off the feud for now. But post Johnny Gargano feud and as NXT champion, things got kind of weird for the duo, because despite the fact that these guys were blood rivals in NXT, Ciampa and Gargano at the start of 2019 were randomly called up to the main roster, but also not really. It was just like a couple of appearances part-time before they were sent right back down to NXT. But worst of all, they were both all of a sudden baby faces on the main roster and buddying up with each other like they hadn't just been through a hellacious feud with each other for the better part of 2 years. What can I say about 2019 WWE that hasn't already been said? Maybe the worst year in WWE history. And then to make things even worse, it was then reported in March that Ciampa would unfortunately have to step away from WWE again, this time to undergo neck surgery, as this would keep him out of action for a while and force him to vacate the title. Ciampa would return at the end of the year in October of 2019, just in time for the War Games match and to challenge Adam Cole for the NXT title going into 2020. And it's in that match where he was cost the title by none other than former DIY partner and ex-feud, ex-foe Johnny Gargano, who would turn heel here and kick off another feud between the two. For God's sake, I didn't want to see this at this time. The DIY fatigue was real as the two would face off in a cinematic match, maybe one of the worstest cinematic matches at this time, with Johnny Gargano getting the win over Ciampa here, as Candice LeRae would turn heel and turn on Tommaso Ciampa, costing him the match. They would all go their separate ways luckily, and this feud didn't keep going on for way too long, thank God, as the next agenda for Tommaso Ciampa after this was to feud with Karrion Kross, and after losing once again, he'd go on hiatus for a few months. And when he did return, he would return as a heel once again, but then very quickly turn babyface once again. It seemed as though WWE didn't really know what to do with him at this time, and he was a bit lost in the shuffle, as the next year or so was spent feuding and then teaming up with Timothy Thatcher, which is a team I thought actually had real potential. They were a super hard-hitting and fun-to-watch team, but they never managed to win the belts, and Timothy got released, thus ending the team suddenly. And by this point now, NXT Black and Gold had become NXT 2.0, and Johnny Gargano was actually exiting the company soon with his contract expiring, which he did indeed do, stepping away from WWE and not being employed by them for some time. But now as a singles guy, once again, an opportunity would present itself for Tommaso Ciampa, as after the very weird Samoa Joe NXT title ordeal around that time, if you remember that, the title was made vacant and Ciampa would win a 4-way match to win that vacant belt, finally winning back Goldie and winning back the NXT World title belt that he never lost in the first place. And he had a nice babyface run with the belt during this whole Black and Gold versus 2.0 feud and storyline that was going on at the time. It was a nice return to form for Tommaso Ciampa before he eventually lost the belt to Bron Breakker. And after that, Tommaso Ciampa had essentially completed NXT, and obviously now with it being 2.0, he didn't really fit in with the roster's MO, so he did indeed get a main roster call-up in April of 2022. And the first few months of this main roster call-up were a little bit fuzzy. There wasn't too much going on for Tommaso Ciampa, as he had a weird alliance with The Miz, but then got injured very quickly into this run. When he did return a few months later though, it wouldn't be too long after that when Johnny Gargano would also return back to WWE and DIY would reform now on the main roster. And now with Triple H in control of creative, this was surely going to be a big time for DIY, as DIY were Triple H's boys back in NXT, right? As DIY were initially part of the Raw brand, and they did have numerous attempts at the tag titles on Raw, but they just couldn't get it done. However, quickly after being drafted to SmackDown in 2024, they would get the job done for those brands' titles and win the belts from A-Town Down Under, only to lose the belts 28 days later in a bit of a questionable decision. I don't know why they just had them be transitional champions. However, they would win them back before the end of the year, as they defeated the Motor City Machine Guns, having turned heel during the course of this match. And at least in this title reign, they actually got to have a bit of a proper reign, but also not really, as though this reign was better than the last one, as this went 98 days as opposed to 28. Not much really notable stuff was done with the belts before they lost them to the Street Profits. However, the matches where they challenged for the belts once again after losing them, these matches were bangers. These were classics, and probably the last time that WWE ever cared about tag team wrestling, as there was of course the triple threat TLC match on SmackDown, which was one of the best matches of the year, and then the 6-pack TLC match at SummerSlam, which once again, the last time WWE will ever care about tag team wrestling. But after that, it really was all downhill for the tag division, and of course downhill for DIY, who fell into irrelevancy following this, and going into 2026, a major change would be made for the trio, as at the start of the year, Tommaso Ciampa would announce his departure from WWE, disbanding DIY as we knew it, leaving Gargano as a singles guy, as Tommaso Ciampa would enter free agency, and it has not been good since. For Gargano, because for Ciampa, it's been pretty damn good since. In fact, it has been far different to whatever the hell Gargano and LeRae are doing right now. As on the January 28th, 2026 episode of AEW Dynamite, Ciampa would make his AEW debut as a babyface once again, officially becoming All Elite, as he answered the open challenge for Mark Briscoe's TNT title, with the match taking place 3 days later on Collision in his debut for AEW. And in his first match for AEW, Tommaso Ciampa would win gold as he defeated Mark Briscoe to win the TNT title in a banger of a match. And as TNT champion, he would go on to make one successful defense in a 3-way match against Claudio Castagnoli and Roderick Strong, another awesome match for him, before he then lost the belt to Kyle Fletcher on an episode of Dynamite 3 days later. Once again, another great match, thus making his reign only last 11 days, but what an 11 days this was. Talk about making a short reign a memorable one, and since this moment, Ciampa has just wrestled banger after banger in AEW, as he has since turned back heel and he teamed up with FTR in a bit of a storyline they had going against the Young Bucks and Briscoe. He challenged for the TNT title again in the Casino Gauntlet. He had great matches with Ace Austin, Mark Briscoe once again, and of course, who could forget the world title match against Darby Allin, one of my favorite matches of the year in any promotion, and my favorite Darby Allin title defense. Tommaso Ciampa's career has totally reformed since becoming All Elite, and I am pleasantly pleasantly surprised with how well this has gone, as well as a lot of AEW fans are pleasantly surprised too with how well it's gone. His performances have been great, and he's over, brother, and I say this as someone who was pretty skeptical when he first signed, only because of how big the AEW roster already is. I thought he might get lost in the shuffle, but he has quickly became one of my favorites on the AEW roster, and has reminded us all who he is and why everyone loved his work in 2018. This is easily his best body of work since then. And obviously he is now feuding with Chris Jericho, so it isn't all sunshines and rainbows. He is stuck in the Jericho-verse, but at the very least, I think his AEW run has already destroyed his WWE main roster run. And so yeah, that's where we're at now for Tommaso Ciampa, and as for Johnny Gargano and Candice LeRae, if you couldn't guess it, they're still doing this weird depression gimmick while Tommaso Ciampa is just killing it in AEW. It couldn't be more contrasting. Tommaso Ciampa bet on himself. He could see that this DIY stable wasn't going anywhere in WWE, and he made the right call because, like I said, it is night and day between Tommaso Ciampa and Johnny Gargano and Candice LeRae. As Kairi Hosako was born on September 23rd, 1988 in Japan, and before becoming a pro wrestler, she had great experience in multiple sports, including yachting specifically, and also she had great experience in theatre and acting, and those two things combined, theatre and sports, when they are combined, are two things that go hand in hand with professional wrestling, of course. As Kairi's love for these two things would lead to her finding her love for professional wrestling, and in 2011, Kairi would begin training under Stardom to become a professional wrestler. What is Stardom, you may be asking? Well, they are the leading Joshi wrestling promotion based in Japan. What's Joshi, you ask? Well, Joshi is a Japanese term referring to women or girls, so in short, Stardom is the leading all-female wrestling promotion in Japan, and to be honest, probably the entire world too. She officially passed her pro test at the end of that year, officially becoming a professional wrestler, and she would begin working Stardom under the name of Kairi Hojo. And using her background in yachting, she would be dubbed the Pirate Princess, and this character and look and entire aesthetic would stick around for pretty much her entire wrestling career. As Kairi would win her first title in Stardom in 2013, winning the Goddess of Stardom tag titles alongside Natsumi Shozuki, though their reign only lasted a month. That same year though, she won the vacant Artist of Stardom Championship, which is a trios belt, and the next year regained the Goddess belt, getting an 8-month reign with the title this time. And to top it all off, in the next year, in March of 2015, she would win the top prize in Stardom, winning the world title by defeating Io Shirai to win it. She would lose the belt to Miko Satomura in June of that year, and pretty much in just a few years, Kairi had achieved really all there was to do in Stardom, winning every single belt. She would also do some work in America for the first time, with her one-match run in Lucha Underground being very memorable to a lot of people, as she faced and was defeated by Penta in a crazy match. And by 2016, she was getting heavy interest from the WWE, reportedly being offered a contract in October. And after much deliberation and a little concern over Kairi's concussion history, Kairi would officially sign her WWE contract and join the company in March 2017 on a 3-year deal. And 2017 really was the perfect time for a female wrestler of Kairi's caliber to sign for the WWE, as 2017 this year would see the Mae Young Classic take place for the first time. The Mae Young Classic, if you don't know somehow, was of course the all-women's tournament that WWE held that featured a combination of their up-and-coming female stars and unsigned female indie talent. And Kairi, now under the brand new ring name of Kairi Sane, would go on an incredible run in this tournament, defeating some very familiar faces, as she defeated Tessa Blanchard, Bianca Belair, Dakota Kai and Toni Storm in that order to advance to the finals of the 2017 Mae Young Classic, and in the final she was met with Shayna Baszler. And once again, Kairi Sane would win as she defeated Shayna Baszler, making history as the inaugural Mae Young Classic winner, a huge moment so early for her in her WWE tenure. And with that tournament victory, she earned herself a shot at the vacant NXT Women's title, as this would be in the form of a 4-way match at TakeOver War Games 2017, with Ember Moon coming out on top. From there though, Kairi Sane would assimilate into the NXT brand and start working on TV regularly, being presented as one of the top women's stars as she slowly but surely worked her way towards yet another shot at the NXT Women's title. As her next chance at the NXT Women's belt wouldn't come until the summer of the next year, as at NXT TakeOver Brooklyn 2018, she would go for the belt once again, now being held by old foe and former Mae Young finalist opponent Shayna Baszler. As in a very good match, Kairi would dethrone Shayna once again to win the NXT Women's title, and now she was at the very tippity top of the division with a title win and a big tournament win under her name after just a year. However, Kairi's actual reign with the NXT Women's title wasn't all sunshines and rainbows. In fact, it's probably one of the worst NXT Women's title reigns in history, unfortunately, as she held the belt for only 71 days in total without a successful defense under her name, and she lost it right back to Shayna Baszler. Kairi Sane would try numerous times to regain the belt but was just not successful in any of her efforts, with her final attempt coming on the 17th of April 2019 episode of NXT, where as per stipulation, if she lost the match, she would never be able to challenge for the belt again, and she did indeed lose this match and was not allowed to challenge for the belt again, but this stipulation was done in order to write her off NXT, as a main roster call-up was imminent and she would be called up to the SmackDown brand post-WrestleMania in 2019. And it's here and around this time where herself and Asuka would form the Kabuki Warriors tag team, and with Paige as their manager, at first before they turned on her, they would take over the women's tag division. As they first won the women's tag belts at Hell in a Cell 2019, winning them off of Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross, and they would defend the belts numerous times, holding them for over 6 months, including the infamously very bad match against Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair at TLC in the main event in a TLC match, where Kairi unfortunately got concussed following getting an iPad chucked at her head. And Kairi Sane would return to action a couple of months later, and the Kabuki Warriors eventually lost the titles at the COVID WrestleMania back to Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross, and shortly after this, Kairi would get injured again, this time at the hands of Nia Jax, who seemed to be injuring a lot of people at this time. But when Kairi Sane did come back, herself and the now Raw Women's Champion Asuka would get themselves into a feud with Sasha Banks and Bayley, with Bayley being the SmackDown Women's Champion at this time and Bayley and Sasha Banks being the women's tag belt holders at this time, so all the women's belts were involved in this feud. For Kairi though herself, her involvement in this feud was short-lived, as after getting attacked brutally backstage by Bayley on the July 27th Raw, it was announced by Kairi Sane herself that she would actually be departing WWE, and that was her last appearance. This was a big out of nowhere announcement, a very sad announcement to see Kairi Sane leaving WWE so abruptly and so early on, but she said she was doing it so she can move back to Japan with her husband, which of course is totally fair. Not really up to any of us to judge that, and sure enough, Kairi Sane would disappear from WWE just like that, and she remained under contract for another year as she worked as an ambassador for the company, but her contract would officially expire in December of 2021. And her wrestling career seemed all but done until just 2 months later when she made her big return back to Stardom. And this was a really great time for Kairi Sane to make her return back to the Joshi wrestling scene, as the new IWGP Women's Championship just got introduced that year. And this belt would give the historic opportunity for Joshis to work New Japan Pro Wrestling shows for the first ever time, as at the end of 2022 at New Japan's historic X Over event, Kairi would main event the show against Mayu Iwatani in the finals to crown the first IWGP Women's Champion. And Kairi would make history once again with another inaugural tournament win, winning the whole damn thing and becoming the IWGP Women's Champion as the first ever champion. Once again though, just like her first NXT Women's title reign, this reign was not all sunshines and rainbows, and in fact was quite a nothing title reign once again, as this reign with the IWGP Women's title belt only lasted 90 days with only one successful title defense before losing it to Mercedes Moné. And shortly after this, Kairi would become a free agent, and the door was now open for her to return to WWE again, which she would indeed do in late 2023 as she returned at Crown Jewel and instantly joined the Damage Control stable. And this really was a great spot for Kairi Sane to be in at this point of her wrestling career, and this was probably the best point of her WWE run as a whole, as Damage Control were a dominant act. They were a regular fixture on TV, they were constantly presented as looking very strong, and they won pretty much every women's belt that they could win, both singles and tag. With Kairi Sane and Asuka, the Kabuki Warriors reuniting as a duo once again and winning the women's tag belts once again as well. However, when they did lose the belts and the group turned face shortly soon after, things kind of started to go downhill. As first of all, Kairi Sane got injured once again in January of 2025 as she had to leave to get surgery on her thumb, and in the time she was absent, Damage Control would quietly disband as Dakota Kai, one of the members, was shockingly released from WWE. And Kairi Sane would make her WWE return on May 19th, 2025, see no evil reference, and at this point now, she was a total side character to Io Sky and Asuka, whom WWE seemed far more interested in giving focus to. And sure, herself and Asuka did win the women's tag belts once again for a third reign, but these only lasted 56 days and was very much a here damn reign. And after that, it was truly all downhill once again as Io and Asuka started feuding with each other, with tensions boiling between the two of them, and Kairi at this point just a total side character and non-factor in this feud. As on the Raw after WrestleMania 42, Kairi Sane would wrestle her final and last WWE match as she teamed with Asuka in a losing effort to Io Sky and Rhea Ripley, and just 4 days later, Kairi Sane was shockingly released from the WWE alongside numerous others. And WWE fans were pissed and very angry about Kairi Sane being released from the WWE, as she really didn't get to play much of an important role in a feud between Io and Asuka, where realistically she should be a focal point of that feud. They should be fighting over her. As out of all the various releases that had happened and the cuts that took place, it seemed as though the WWE Universe were most outraged about Kairi Sane's. But despite the backlash and despite the fans letting their voices be heard with the We Want Kairi hashtags and the We Want Kairi chants at shows, it unfortunately led to nothing, and it's most likely that Kairi Sane will not be returning back to WWE. A true shame. And yeah, Kairi's future in wrestling is now unknown. It's unknown whether she's going to continue being a wrestler period, or where she's going to go. What company will she end up at next if she is to continue on wrestling? What is for certain though is that Kairi Sane was not given a fair shake in her WWE run. And it's a strange thing to say maybe, because Kairi Sane, I admit, her run in WWE overall was not bad at all. She had some big matches, she won belts, she was part of the Damage Control stable, she was part of the Kabuki Warriors. However, the one thing that Kairi Sane never got was a fair shake on her own as a singles worker. Unlike the likes of Io Sky and Asuka, Kairi Sane was never given an opportunity to show what she could do on her own on the main roster, with her NXT run being the only time that she was ever actually on her own. Throughout her entire main roster WWE run, in both runs, she was always just a member of a team or a stable, where she was always a side character in that group and never the main focus, and never really got any spotlight on herself. And it's a true shame, because in my opinion, Kairi Sane is just as talented as the likes of Io Sky and Asuka, who, as I said, get a very deserved platform and very deserved pushes, but I feel as though Kairi could have also got that deserved singles push that she never got. But yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see what Kairi Sane does next. Obviously, there's speculation about AEW. Forbidden Door is coming up soon, so maybe that could be a good avenue to have her come into AEW. But obviously, there are always questions about AEW and how they handle their women's division's booking, so would it be a good idea for Kairi Sane to go to AEW? Maybe not. And other than that, I guess the other possibilities are a Stardom return once again, maybe TNA, I couldn't see that happening though, or maybe MLW, there's some Joshis on MLW. Kairi Sane versus Shotzi Blackheart on MLW for the women's belt, I would not say no to that, that sounds pretty exciting. But yeah, it's just a guessing game here. What Kairi Sane actually does next is unknown right now, and we won't find out until those 90 days are up. But as I said once again, I really feel as though Kairi Sane just never got that chance in WWE to shine on her own, and that just sucks to see. She really had so much success so early on with the big Mae Young Classic tournament win and the NXT Women's title win, and that really was the highest heights that she hit as a singles worker. It was never anything above that after this. Born on the 6th of May 1988 in Auckland, New Zealand, it wouldn't be until she was 19 that she became a professional wrestler and began wrestling across her native country and the nearby Australia. She would take on the ring name of just Evie, a very simple name, and a name inspired by her favourite Pokemon. Leave in the comments down below what's your favourite evolution, because mine is Umbreon all the way. And she would spend the next few years working the regional circuit in both New Zealand and Australia, and she would work with a few familiar faces such as Jessie McKay and Madison Eagles. And going into the 2010s, we'd really see Evie expand as she started getting booked in the States, more specifically with the all-women's promotions Shimmer and Shine in 2013. As during this first US tour, she worked with familiar names like Mia Yim and Mercedes Martinez, and following that first US tour in 2013, she would then tour Japan for the first time in 2014, further expanding herself and getting more reps in, and by next year, Evie was one of the top stars in the Australia-New Zealand scene and a rising star on the indies as she was frequently coming into the US to do more work there. This led to her first WWE appearance in October of 2015 in a squash match on NXT as she was beaten by Nia Jax, and then going into 2016 she would do her first tour of Stardom, which really was a great indicator of just how highly touted she was at this point. And after another year of working between the States and her home territory, Evie would get her biggest opportunity to date as 2017 would see the first edition of the Mae Young Classic take place in WWE. If you don't recall, the Mae Young Classic was a tournament that WWE held at the time, with this being the very first one. Like I said, it was an all-women's tournament featuring some upcoming names of the women's division in WWE and some unsigned indie talent. And as it turns out, Evie had actually signed a WWE contract just 6 months prior at the end of 2016, and after finishing her indie dates and obligations, she was ready for the Mae Young Classic. And now under the name of Dakota Kai, she would go on a bit of a run in this tournament as she would first defeat Kavita Devi and then Rhea Ripley before losing to eventual winner Kairi Sane in the quarterfinals. And a quick note about Dakota Kai's match with Kavita Devi, that match just has like a mad amount of views on YouTube. I swear it's like in the hundreds of millions or near there. And from here, Dakota Kai would continue on in NXT, and she'd spend about the next year or so mostly being a regular on the house show circuit, with her appearances on TV for NXT being more occasional, and usually they were in a jobber match setting or as a face in a battle royal or even on NXT UK. But towards the end of 2018 though, Dakota Kai would start to become more of a presence on mainline NXT TV as she allied with Kairi Sane in her NXT Women's title feud against Shayna Baszler, and maybe some bigger things were coming. However, at seemingly the worst time, bad luck would strike as Dakota Kai unfortunately suffered an injury during a live event in December, that being a torn ACL which would keep her out of action for 9 months. However, thankfully upon her return to NXT, she would continue right where she left off, and she would be taken to the next level in her NXT career, following a major heel turn. You see, around the time that Dakota Kai came back from injury, so did Tegan Nox around that same time period, and they would start teaming up on TV. And they would ally themselves up with Candice LeRae and Rhea Ripley, who was feuding with Shayna Baszler over the NXT Women's Belt, and she had her own crew of heels with a War Games match set between the two groups. However, Dakota Kai ended up getting snubbed from the team, with them picking Mia Yim over her, and this did not sit well with Dakota Kai, who would actually end up in the team after all. As Mia Yim was mysteriously attacked, I wonder by who. I couldn't just think of who this possibly could be, and thus Dakota Kai would then replace Mia Yim in the War Games match and get her rightful spot in the match. However, during the course of the match and during Dakota Kai's entrance, there would be an awesome moment when she turned heel and attacked Tegan Nox inside of the shark cage. It removed them both from the match, leaving it a 2-on-4, which somehow the two still managed to get the win in, but this was genuinely an awesome heel turn and an all-timer NXT moment, this Dakota Kai attack on Tegan Nox. This of course kicked off a feud with herself and Tegan Nox, which Dakota Kai would get the W in, and she also defeated Mia Yim in their big grudge match as well, as you would guess, Dakota Kai was the mystery attacker, who would have thought? And Dakota Kai would spend 2020 near the top of the women's division and the women's scene in NXT, but just couldn't get her claws on the NXT women's title, with her biggest opportunity at the belt being at NXT TakeOver 30 in August of that year, as she failed to beat Io Shirai for the belt in maybe one of the better moments and more opportune times to give her the victory. She was in the winning side of War Games once again that year, but it was when she started teaming with Raquel Gonzalez going into the next year that things would really shake up for her NXT run, as they would enter the Women's Dusty Rhodes Tag Team Classic, the first ever one, and they would win the tournament, going all the way and winning the whole damn thing to earn a shot at the main roster's Women's Tag Championships. They would, however, lose that match. They were unsuccessful, losing to Shayna Baszler and Nia Jax. However, there was a dusty finish, as Dakota Kai was not the legal person in the match when she was submitted, and as such, the very next week, Dakota Kai and Raquel Gonzalez were awarded the newly formed NXT Women's Tag titles as the first ever champions. So yeah, history being made here as the inaugural champions, the first ever champions in a title lineage for a belt that is gonna last for so long, right? I mean, these belts are gonna be around forever, right? And totally not pointless to introduce. And of course, it was the biggest W of Dakota Kai's career thus far, all to then lose them not even an hour later. Yep, I'm not even kidding. The very same night they were awarded the belt, they dropped them to Ember Moon and Shotzi Blackheart. Literally, why? Like, you couldn't even wait until a takeover to redo this match and have these two finalists in the tournament rematch? Like, why did it need to be the same night the belts were awarded? Not even like an hour later. It was in the middle of the show, not even in the main event. Just a total slap in the face and just totally pointless to do, because why not just have the match be for the belts? Why award them the belts without them earning them in a match to then lose them? Just have the match be for the belts and don't have Dakota Kai and Raquel be awarded them to begin with. So pointless. I digress though. I think the reason this booking took place was because they had big plans for Raquel Gonzalez, who would end up turning face, and the alliance between Raquel and Dakota would explode soon after, with Raquel getting a singles push and she would start going for the NXT Women's title, and when Dakota Kai cost her match against Mandy Rose for the title, it led to a Team Dakota versus Team Raquel War Games match in December 2021. Team Dakota would lose this match, marking her first loss in a Women's War Games match for Dakota Kai, and she was kind of stuck in limbo for a bit after this. That would be until she turned face and reunited with Raquel once again for whatever reason, which would lead to them actually winning their NXT Women's Tag Belts once again at Stand and Deliver the next year. Finally, they were going to get a proper reign with the belts they didn't get to the first time. Just kidding, they lost them on the very next NXT, 3 days later. Man, I'm not even gonna crash out about it. I already have earlier in the video, but yeah, 3 days once again. I don't even know why they did this, because they lost them straight back to the Toxic Attraction, who they won them off of. Just, what is this booking? The next week, Dakota unsuccessfully challenged for the NXT Women's Belt, and that would end up being her last appearance in this first WWE run, as she was released from the WWE on April 29th, 2022. There was already talks that Dakota Kai was intent on not renewing her contract, which was coming up at around that time, so this release wasn't really much of a surprise, but the future was definitely uncertain for Dakota. Many fans speculated she might get an AEW run and become All Elite, but no, it would actually be a WWE return instead, as Triple H took over creative and brought Dakota Kai back in a big way, as she would re-debut now on the main roster at SummerSlam, officially forming the Damage Control stable alongside Bayley and Io Sky, and eventually Kairi Sane and Asuka. This was a great spot for Dakota and herself. She was now part of the top women's heel act in the company and a group that had so much momentum upon their debut. And herself and Io Sky would enter a tournament for the vacant women's tag belts, which they made it to the finals of and lost to Aaliyah and Raquel. What is Dakota Kai's luck with women's tag titles? And why? Why did Aaliyah and Raquel win these belts? It was such an odd decision at the time. Dakota Kai and Io Sky was the obvious choice, and they literally would win it 9 days later anyway, so again I ask, what is the point and what is this booking? This win would mark the first bit of gold for the Damage Control group, and they would hold the belts for 45 days with one successful title defense before losing them to Alexa Bliss and Asuka, and then winning them back again 5 days later. Genuinely, what the fuck is this booking? But finally, the curse would be lifted and she would finally get a lengthier reign with the belts at nearly 4 months in this women's tag title reign. But even so, there was only one successful title defense in those 4 months before losing them to Becky Lynch and Lita. And this time they wouldn't win them back, which unfortunately would mark the last time Dakota Kai won a title in WWE. Spoilers for later. And this would result in a feud which led to a 6-woman tag match at WrestleMania 39, where Damage Control would lose to Becky Lynch, Lita, and Trish Stratus. Damage Control were drafted to the SmackDown brand in 2023, and not too long after, Dakota Kai would unfortunately tear her ACL again, just so unlucky, leaving her out of action for many months. She would appear as a manager for a bit while she wasn't cleared to go in the ring until early 2024, when she did get cleared just in time for Bayley's big crashing and exit from the group. Dakota initially took Bayley's side and exited the stable along with her, but it was a ruse, a swerve all along, and Dakota double-crossed Bayley and rejoined Damage Control. She would compete in Mania that year as the group lost to Bianca Belair, Naomi, and Jade Cargill, and the group were drafted back to Raw. They would turn babyface pretty quickly into their Raw run, which would mark maybe a big change for the group and Dakota Kai, of course, but unfortunately for Dakota, she suffered yet another injury, this time tearing her meniscus. She would return by the end of the year, just in time to enter a tournament for the new Women's IC title, and she would make it all the way to the finals, set to face Lyra Valkyria for the new Women's Intercontinental belt. And a lot of people wanted to see Dakota win this, and it felt like a really good opportunity to give Dakota Kai the win here in what was maybe a title win she deserved, and she could finally get a proper run with a belt as the first inaugural IC champion, with even Dakota herself on stream just asking for an opportunity.
If I don't win on Monday, we riot. Guys! I've never had like an opportunity as a singles competitor on a PLE. And I'm not talking about NXT, you know what I mean? CW Sober, thank you for the 3 months. I don't know. I'm getting like, you know that feeling where you're just like, give me an opportunity, please, anything. I'm crying. I'm crying because I'm so emotional about this.
However, despite the plea and backing from fans, it just wasn't to be, and Lara would defeat Dakota to win the Women's IC title, and 2 weeks later, it was reported once again that Dakota Kai was injured, having picked up a concussion. And she would make a couple of more appearances on WWE TV, mostly on Main Event upon returning, but on the 2nd of May 2025, Dakota Kai was once again released from the WWE as part of the yearly budget cuts. It truly was a shame, as these last couple of years of her run were just met with such bad luck and some extremely cursed booking. Many fans were obviously unhappy about her being released from WWE, but by this point in her run, she had lasted 3 years in this second run in WWE, and it didn't seem like WWE at any point saw her as anything more than the C side of Damage Control. And Dakota Kai has since returned to the indies, now under the name of Charlie, but she's only had a couple of matches so far, and who knows what the future for Charlie holds. With an AEW appearance or an AEW signing is still absolutely possible, but who knows, it's been about a year now, and it still hasn't happened. I think Dakota Kai had many opportunities in WWE to be taken to the next level, but WWE just refused to do anything substantial with her. She would either make it to the final hurdle before she was booked to lose, or when she finally did get a title reign, they just weren't given anything in those title reigns. Like, the booking of Dakota Kai around the women's tag belts is just some of the most cursed and just absolutely nonsensical booking I've ever seen. I truly can't wrap my head around it. I think there was absolutely an opportunity to make her a big singles heel in NXT, but they opted to do the team with Raquel instead, and she ended up getting a bigger push than Dakota. And yeah, obviously there was bad luck with injuries, but I also can't help but think there were many opportunities for WWE to take Dakota to the next level, and they just refused to do so. As much as I love Lyra Valkyria and she was a great women's IC champion, maybe Dakota Kai should have won that one before dropping it to Lyra once again. But guys, that's going to do it from me discussing all of Triple H's fumbles. If I'm being honest, the real biggest fumble of Triple H's WWE tenure in creative so far is a certain tag team that like to clap their hands and think that they rock. A certain tag team that might be appearing up in AEW very shortly and are easily a topic for their own video. But if you guys enjoyed this one, then be sure to leave a like on it and subscribe with notifications on so you never miss a video on the TTW channel. See you in the next one. Goodbye and keep on rolling.